meeting is being recorded.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to our weekly or semi-weekly chats with author Kevin McAleer on the novels of, well, various writers, books, short stories, essays, novels of various writers, hopefully more of the classic type writers. This last 7 or 8 weeks, we've been covering Raymond Chandler, covering all his novels. We had to miss last Saturday because Kevin McAleer has a novel coming out called LA Kid, and he's having to do some readings of it at various places around Berlin. And
that's all. Let's not exaggerate. I had 3 readings out in the German countryside, just about an hour outside of Berlin.
But, I'm sorry, I misspoke.
No, don't be sorry. Yeah, say anything that will help the book. But yeah, LA Kid, and maybe talk about that.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about the book?
Point. If after you have read it, I sent you your copy.
So. I haven't gotten it yet, but
maybe we can say. Yeah, maybe we can save that. Thanks for asking, Tim. Maybe we can save that for when we do discuss it, because I'll just go on and on forever. You know, that won't be a.
Okay, we might have to have a special session.
Yeah, but that could be down the line.
Okay, yeah, we're mostly here to talk about other writers, but you can drop in a little bit here and there on your stuff.
Yeah, when you get it and when you have read it, then we can have an intelligent conversation about it.
Maybe
you should get it any day. I sent it almost 2 weeks ago. So
okay, all right, sounds great, Kevin. Unfortunately, I don't have the list of Chandler novels in front of me. So give us the rundown and then tell us what we're talking about this week.
No problem. It's like saying the Our Father. I got it completely memorized. First novel was The Big Sleep, 1939. The second was Farewell, My Lovely, 1940. The third was The High Window, 1942. The fourth was The Lady in the Lake, 1943. The fifth was The Little Sister, 1949. The sixth was The Long Goodbye, 1953. And now we have Playback, 1958, his final completed novel with Philip Marlowe. And yeah, this will bring us to the end of the line.
The end of the line. I read that line a few times in Double Indemnity. I was reading the screenplay that Chandler had done with the other guy. I forget whose name. Oh,
Billy Wilder.
Billy Wilder, yeah. And they use that phrase, the end of the line. We're at the end of the line, baby. You know?
Yeah. Was that the line exactly? You can correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think it was all the way down the line. I think that was the line. We're gonna take it all the way down the line. I believe that's it. Viewers, you can write in and correct me or Tim, whoever might be mistaken here, but I think that's it.
Okay, well, close enough either way.
Same difference.
Yeah, not a big difference, but I did find that screenplay of interest, so we may want to cover that at some point. But
yeah, I'd love to talk about that. Sure.
Maybe do that next week. We'll decide at the end of this talk where we're going to go with that.
Good.
Okay, so Playback. You've read it obviously before, maybe more than once. What was your opinion of it this time around?
Let it just be said, as long as we're discussing Chandler screenplays, this started out originally as a screenplay, which I'm sure you know, but for our viewers,
I don't know it.
Yes. Well, you can kind of tell it's his shortest novel by a long ways. It's about it's half as long as his last novel, The Long Goodbye, and it's about 2/3 as long as most of his others. So you can tell it's basically written from a screenplay. And it was a screenplay, I think, commissioned by Universal Pictures. 1947. And this was when Chandler was in great demand in Hollywood because he had written Double Indemnity with Billy Wilder in 1944. Then he'd written The Blue Dahlia, starring Alan Ladd, which I don't think it's a great film, but he did it under some duress because Ladd had been drafted into the Army and they wanted to get the picture done and in the can before Ladd was drafted. So Chandler, that's another story in and of itself, but
Okay.
And he wrote, of course, then Strangers on a Train, the Hitchcock film, and he had a little assistance with that. Hitchcock brought in someone else. I think Chandler might have bowed out of the job at a certain point. He didn't really care for Hitchcock much. And but this is 1947, Playback. So Chandler's in the thick of things in Hollywood, making a big name for himself and making big money as well. And 1947 is also the year after he moved to La Jolla, which is also it's of relevance because this novel Playback takes place in La Jolla, which Chandler dubs Esmeralda. So as he called Santa Monica Bay City, he calls now La Jolla Esmeralda. It's another novel that takes place elsewhere than Los Angeles. First one we had, of course, was The Lady in the Lake, took place probably up in Big Bear, half the novel, it seems, or a good chunk of it. And then we have The Long Goodbye, which largely takes place in, we don't know, the Conejo Valley. Your ocean breeze maybe doesn't make it out to Conejo Valley, but it seems to be in that direction, Ventura direction. And that's, I think it was technically part of Los Angeles, the part of town he was describing in The Long Goodbye, but it's not the mean streets of LA at all. It's this rich little suburb. So I would rank this as the third in his non-Los Angeles novels. And for that reason, you can see it coming, Tim. I didn't care for it much. I like it when he's in Los Angeles. And that is always something that is a minus for me whenever Marlowe leaves LA proper for any length of time. So that at the outset. Now, I know La Jolla very well. I went to school at UC San Diego, which is in La Jolla. And I lived in La Jolla, not in the ritzy part of town, but inland for 3 years. And then I lived in Salerno Beach for a year when I was teaching. So I know the area very, very well. So in that regard, it's interesting for me. You know, it's always fun to see, well, what's he referring to? What's that street? What's that beachfront property? What's that restaurant? So that was fun. But as I've been saying throughout our podcasts, whenever I mention Playback, I mention it in a denigrating way, in passing, saying, well, his powers were declining at that point. So what I'm saying is there isn't the same Marlowe magic in this as you had in the earlier novels. Not even like you had in The Long Goodbye, which you and I both found a bit disappointing, if I'm not misrepresenting your view.
That's true.
And so I'm not going to give it a thumbs down because it's still Marlowe in recognizable form, and it's still Chandler and the prose I love, but the magic only happens very infrequently. And I can give an example. It's a good one. In fact, it was mentioned by Ian Fleming in an interview with Chandler for the BBC, and you put me onto this, and I heard the interview, and Ian Fleming, they were friends, and in fact, James Bond seems to have been inspired somewhat, at least, by Philip Marlowe, and you can see the connection, you know, very hard man, good with his fists, the women love him, right? You can see how Fleming was given a great deal of inspiration, and how Marlowe might have even been his template. I don't know for a fact, but I read that somewhere, and even if I didn't know it, one could deduce it, I think, because Bond only came along in the 50s, and Chandler had been writing Marlowe stories ever since 1939. But in this interview with the BBC that Ian Fleming did with Chandler, Playback had just been published. And Fleming, in fact, cited this very passage, which is the old panache, the old high spirits, the gusto, the word that Chandler used to describe his best writing. Here you have it. So a woman pulls a gun on him. What else is new? Pulls a gun on Marlowe. I looked at it. Oh, guns, I said. Don't scare me with guns. I've lived with them all my life. I teethed on an old Derringer single shot, the kind the riverboat gamblers used to carry. As I got older, I graduated to a lightweight sporting rifle, then a .303 target rifle, and so on. I once made a bull at 900 yards with open sights. In case you don't know, the whole target looks the size of a postage stamp at 900 yards. So this woman's holding a gun on him, and Marlowe's giving this little soliloquy on guns in his inimitable, offhanded, jokey manner. That's the old Marlowe, right? There are little glimmers of it, but not enough to carry me through even a 165-page novel, and to not even enough to make me say I liked it. I didn't necessarily like it. It's okay. There are nice parts, as I say, but it's not the same Marlowe. And another thing, Marlowe's older, right? And I think it's sort of Chandler's way of maturing his detective, that he's also, you will have noted, he sleeps with two women in the novel. And one of them is a client. So my dictum that we discussed in the last couple videos, where Marlowe does not sleep with a client, that's a no-no. It's a ethical matter for him. He does. One could argue that, well, the woman he sleeps with, well, the first one is not a violation of the dictum that Marlowe, the private detective, does not sleep with his clients, because she's just the secretary of his client, a woman by the name of Helen Vermillier. His client is Clyde Umney, a lawyer. But the second one he sleeps with is the target of his investigation, the reason that this Umney fellow has put him on the job. It's to follow this woman. Her name is Betty Mayfield, alias Eleanor King. And at a certain point, Marlowe, he goes over to the pursued, this Eleanor King, and he takes her on as his client. She pays him a nominal fee. He says, okay, good, because he wants to protect her. He finds out a little bit of her story. She's on the run. She's probably a victim of some mad, vengeful father whose son she was married with, and he happened to die, and she was caught in compromising circumstances, and the jury got her off. The jury convicted her, but then the judge, it was in North Carolina, there's a certain state law that says, state statute that says that the judge can reverse the jury's verdict in certain capital crimes. Well, he sleeps with her. So he sleeps with two girls, and one of them is a client. But you could kind of, sneak around it and say, well, he actually doesn't. He makes her a client in order to protect her, and then they fall, they have a passionate little evening. So it's not the same Marlowe, okay? And that's what I miss. And he's not in Los Angeles, and it's not the same Chandler. Again, I don't know if you did a simile count, a simile.
I did a simile meter.
And there are, they make a comeback from The Long Goodbye, I think, a little bit, at least in comparison to the number of pages, I would argue. You're shaking your head.
How many similes did you find? I didn't find many at all.
There aren't many at all. However, there are some good ones when they come along. There's this great one where he goes up to LA Union Station, and he wants to intercept the super chief coming across the country to see who disembarks, and if it's his subject that he's supposed to follow and report back to this Clyde Umnion. And am I going to find it? I don't know, but I think he said something along the lines of the subject was as easy to spot as a kangaroo in a dinner jacket. That's the old Chandler. And then you get another one where he's describing Miss Vermillier, this first woman that he goes to bed with. And he says, "Thanks," I said, and moved to the door. I wouldn't say she looked exactly wistful, but neither did she look as hard to get as a controlling interest in General Motors. All right. That's not a simile, but there's wit that crops up at not infrequent occasions, and I think
that is a simile, Kevin. You said that's not a simile. That is a simile, because it said, if it says like or as, and it does say as a controlling interest in General Motors. So I do believe that is a simile.
You're right. I stand corrected.
Okay.
So thanks
but I only noted.
Thanks for helping support my thesis. Yeah, I think that the similes do.
Well, Kev, I took account, and all I had was I divided into great similes and good similes, and those had both greatly decreased in The Long Goodbye. But in this case, I only found one of each. I only found one good simile and one great simile. I might have missed 2 or 3, but there's only a handful, if any.
Good. Fair enough. Maybe I was trying to like something about the book. I don't know. Good.
But it just shows me that as he got older, he lost that youthful gusto he had to put in these really stark, bracing similes that peppered in everywhere. That's a sure sign of his decline, so to speak.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where we can talk about his sad personal life. We've touched on it all along, but in 1954, his wife of 30 plus years died, and she died a very slow and painful death, some kind of lung ailment, and he was bereft. And he had already established himself as an alcoholic. He'd quit for long periods to get his writing done, but he would often fall back on the booze. And after Sissy, his wife's death, after Sissy's death in 1954, he was 66 at that point, and he had only 5 years to live. And he hastened his death through the drinking. I think it's pretty much a consensus. He was not happy alone, and his writing declined, as you've noted, and he didn't get much of it done either. His last novel, The Long Goodbye, 1953, published. This comes out in 1958. Well, that's 5 years for a very short novel that we are coming down pretty hard on.
So am I correct in believing, or just conjecturing, did you like this one even less than The Long Goodbye?
I think I have to, yes. I was prepared after having not read it in many years, because I sort of classed it with The Long Goodbye as not my cup of tea when it comes to Marlowe stories. But I started out liking it because it's fun to just watch someone follow someone and see how they do it. You know, how he's observing her, and then this other fellow comes into the picture, this Larry Mitchell, who turns out is a blackmailer, and how Marlowe's trying to suss things out. And I think it reached its peak when he follows her to this hotel, and he convinces this kind of cute young couple, they're engaged, and they're behind the receptionist desk. And he convinces them that he's a lovelorn husband whose wife has been trying to ditch him, and he wants to make up to her and apologize and get back together. And this young girl from behind the receptionist's desk, she kind of falls for it, and they put him in a room right next to this Betty Mayfield. That's her real name, aka Eleanor King. And then what he does then is he wants to hear what she's doing, so he takes out, there's this heating unit on the wall, and he takes the grate off, and then he unscrews the oblong bulbs, and then there's just a steel plate, and he conjectures that, well, on the it's the same, there's a heating unit, there's a duplicate heating unit on the other side of that party wall. So the only thing separating him at this point from this Betty Mayfield's room is the steel plate. And then, like any good detective, he gets out his stethoscope. He puts his stethoscope on, and he puts the stethoscope on the steel plate. And apparently there's great resonance, and you can hear perfectly everything she says. And she makes a phone call or two, and then this blackmailer fellow, Larry Mitchell, comes in, and he gets the lowdown on that. That was nice. So all these detective things, I like it when we get into the nuts and bolts of detecting. But then after that, it doesn't go downhill, but then my enthusiasm started to wane a little bit for all the reasons I've already enumerated.
I did find it an easier plot to follow than a lot of the other books.
Indeed.
Because it's more straight down the line, as we said. It's just very straightforward. You've only got one person who's the subject of of Marlowe's interest, and he's following her from one place to another, and a couple other guys end up entering the story, but it doesn't have like these multiple strands that you're trying to follow in the other and piece them all together. It's a bit more straight. It's probably the most straightforward one that we've read.
Yes. So now we must give listeners an idea of what the plot's all about. So Marlowe's following this guy. Following this woman, excuse me. He doesn't know why. This Clyde Umney, this lawyer in Los Angeles, who wakes him up in the morning and says, you got to head down to Union Station and catch the super chief and follow this woman. Just see where she goes and report back to me as soon as she ends up somewhere. Marlowe doesn't know why. He asks this fellow why, but he won't give him a reason. Well, Marlowe does it. He needs a job, I guess. He's curious. So he does, in fact, end up following her all the way down to La Jolla. La Jolla, for those of you who don't know, it's just north of San Diego. Okay. And it's a beautiful, scenic part of the coast. And did I mention it already? But why is Chandler setting the novel here? Well, in 1946, he moved to La Jolla with Sissy. And he lived right on the coast. He had a beautiful home there on the coast. All that Hollywood screenwriting money, right? And so Marlowe follows her down there. I've mentioned the stethoscope. After this Mitchell fellow leaves, Marlowe goes around to her front door and knocks, and he works his way into her room, and they start talking. And he's trying to figure out what's up with her. What's her story? Because he can't get it from this Clyde Umney fellow. And we still don't know. In fact, what she's running from, because apparently she's running from something, we don't find out till the very end of the novel, which is fine with me because it's an added little mystery, another mysterious strand. The other little mysterious strand is that at a certain point, Marlowe does some more following of her around. They go to this place called the Glass Room. He sees a fight between her and this Larry Mitchell. So he's blackmailing her, but at the same time, he seems to be interested in her as a woman. And he's maybe going to try to exploit her that way as well. Anyway, they're out on the town, and he sees this little fight between, not a physical fight, but the screaming match. And this other fellow who's in the restaurant, big husky fellow, he kind of intervenes and gets this Larry Mitchell thrown out. I think this other fellow, his name is Clark Brandon, and I think he's even the owner of the Glass Room. He's a big shot in town, okay? Apparently an ex-gangster. He's trying to go straight, and he owns a lot of the town. And that's where Marlowe then basically goes back home and gets some shut-eye. Goes back to the hotel, gets some shut-eye. Well, this Betty Mayfield, in the meantime, she has checked out of the hotel, and now she's in another hotel, in a big hotel, and I think it's apparently owned by this Clark Brandon again. Like I said, he's a big wheel around town. Well, in the middle of the night, Marlowe gets a knock on his door, and it's Betty Mayfield. And she says, "You got to help me out here. It's terrible, but this Larry Mitchell, I just discovered him dead on my hotel balcony." Okay. Well, Marlowe wants to help her or find out what's going on at the very least. So he goes up there, and when they take the fire escape so as not to be noticed, he does at least. And when he goes up there, there's no Larry Mitchell there. What's she talking about? There's no Larry Mitchell. There's no nothing on her balcony. Okay, in the meantime, she's taking some sleeping pills, so she's out. So Marlowe, he tries to figure it out. He doesn't get anywhere. It goes on and on like this. This is the two-pronged mystery, or three-pronged rather. Who is this Betty Mayfield? Where is she from? What's she running from? The second prong is, who killed this Larry Mitchell? Because apparently he has been killed, because or at least he's not there anymore. So there's a good chance he might have been killed. He's just disappeared into thin air. And then the third prong of the mystery is, well, if she's not lying, if Betty Mayfield's not lying to Marlowe that Larry Mitchell was dead there on the balcony of her hotel, then who disposed of the body? She couldn't. She's 5'4". She's described, kind of a diminutive woman. She's not going to be able to carry that body anywhere or even throw it over the balcony or anything. So this is a three-pronged mystery. What's up with this Betty Mayfield? Where's she from? What's she running from? Who might have killed Larry Mitchell? If he wasn't killed, then where has he disappeared to? And if he was killed, then who disposed of the body? And how did they do it? And that's basically it. So yeah, Chandler sets it up very nicely, Tim, as you say, because that's all we're required to worry about.
Yeah, usually we have a lot more things to worry about and try to.
We don't know where we are. We don't know what to worry about. We're not sure where exactly we're supposed to look in terms of worrisome matters.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Well, are there any other characters of note in here that are not in that main plot line?
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting in this novel is I think it's the very first one I've read where Marlowe doesn't get worked over by the cops.
And he doesn't get beat up, does he?
Not really. No, he gets a whiskey bottle over the head. This is very early on when he's in the hotel room with Betty Mayfield, and then this blackmailer Larry Mitchell walks in on them, and then they get into a little tussle, and then this Mitchell guy apparently has a gun, and so this Betty Mayfield, she takes a whiskey bottle and cracks Marlowe over the head, and she says afterwards, after Marlowe comes to and they talk about it, she said, well, I didn't want him to kill you. I didn't want him to kill you, shoot you dead with the gun that he was pulling out. And so I just knocked you out so you wouldn't pose a threat to him anymore. He wouldn't feel threatened. But that's the only time he gets knocked out or any kind of mayhem takes place on his person. And
Okay, I guess it happens once then, yeah.
It happens once, just that once, but it's not, it's again to help him out, as it were. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
But the only real cop of note is this fellow named Captain Alessandro. And he's a Latino. And Chandler writes almost admiringly of him, or he puts words into Marlowe's mouth or thoughts into his head that are rather admiring of this Captain Alessandro. He's spick and span. He's really neat. He cuts a sharp figure. He's a real pro. He doesn't work Marlowe over. He's very polite, relatively speaking, for a cop. And yeah, but we're not in LA anymore, nor are we in Bay City. So maybe he's cutting the Esmeralda, the name of La Jolla, cops, some slack here for once. I think, in fact, I read a letter where Chandler actually liked the La Jolla cops. He got a tour once of some police station there, I think, and he said how impressed he was by their professionalism and how they weren't a bunch of roughnecks. And maybe that's his expression of that in this figure of Captain Alessandro.
Okay, so where does this novel rank for you among the 7 Chandler novels?
It's got to be number 7. I mean, it just has to be. Even though I wasn't so thrilled with The Long Goodbye, there are more than a few passages in that where the Chandler/Marlowe magic takes place, and the poetry. And here there's just very little of it. You can see how it started life as a screenplay. It's very bare bones, and that helps us, you and me, to follow the plot, but it doesn't do anything for me with regard to the prose and
So
the entertainment
if it
value.
started off as a screenplay, was there an actual movie with the same title, Playback, or was it under another title when it was?
No. Chandler. I think he submitted it, but they didn't like it at the end. I mean, he got paid for it. It was like some special deal where they just paid him money outright to write a screenplay. It was one of a real one-off deal in Hollywood, but he was held in such regard at that point. They said, "Hey, write a screenplay. We'll pay you some money up front, and we'll either make the film or not, but you get paid for whatever you write." But they didn't make it, and how it was also a very unique deal in Hollywood was that then the rights reverted back to him. How he was then able to make a novel out of it.
Hmm.
But you see that, you can tell it started life as a screenplay.
Well, now that you mentioned some of the features of it, it does make sense.
Yeah, it's almost like a treatment for a novel. Not quite. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's just very skeletal. You don't. The only place where he gets kind of involved in thoughts and ponderings and whatnot, it's very odd, but you have this Henry Clarendon the Fourth character. Remember him? He's this old guy in the hotel lobby. He wears white gloves and spats, and he's got a cane. He's in his 80s, and Marlowe goes to talk to him. He wants to find out about Larry Mitchell, if he knows anything about him, and basically this Clarendon guy tells him, oh, he's a gigolo, and he used to be together with this woman over here. I think her name is Margot West. Chandler describes her as having a cigarette holder that stuck out of her mouth like a bowsprit. There's a good simile for you.
Okay.
And so he talks to this guy, takes up an entire chapter, just Marlowe chatting with this guy, or rather this guy just droning on, but not uninterestingly, philosophizing about the world and all this sort of thing. And I found it not uninteresting, the character, but it's sort of an excuse just to have this guy talk, because we're really none the wiser, or very little the wiser, about Larry Mitchell and his whereabouts and the mysteries in play after we've spoken to this guy. I think it's just a chance for Chandler actually to fill pages in a very short novel and to have an interesting character, a little interlude. And people have conjectured that this is actually Chandler. Because
Okay.
Chandler, toward the end of his life, he had some sort of he had eczema or something on his hands, and here's the irony: this great writer, doctors diagnosed his skin condition as an allergy to paper. So toward the end of his life, he was dictating a lot of his stuff.
Wow.
Or had to a secretary, or had a dictaphone. At the very least, he wore white gloves. So this is maybe Chandler sort of featuring himself. And for that, it's not an interesting. There's another chapter that's sort of odd. There's this guy named Fred Pope. This is right before Marlowe goes to this certain street. I forget its name, but it's named after one of the founding families of La Jolla. And it's like a 2 or 3 page chapter where this Pope fellow, Fred Pope, just gives us a capsule history of Esmeralda. And then we cut back to the street that's named after this founding figure of the community. And then Chandler comes across his first corpse of the novel. He's got to come across one, right? He didn't come across Larry Mitchell, so he's got to come across this other. And it's the parking lot attendant of the hotel, and he's hung himself, or maybe he's been killed. We're not too clear on that. I'm not, at least. But there's another one where just this guy starts giving us a little bit of history of Esmeralda. So I think he was trying to pack the novel. He was trying to get some pagination in there.
Yeah,
because both of these things kind of come out of left field. Both these characters.
Yeah, he's trying to pack it because the inspiration was running a bit dry.
He had this old screenplay. I mean, let's face it. I mean, he'd written the thing back in 1947. You can see how dry the inspiration was running because after The Long Goodbye, it was 5 years.
And it seems like Philip Marlowe's a bit dry. I don't see him drinking as much in this either. The drinkle-meter was kind of low, it seemed.
Yes, I was very disappointed about that. Yeah, he's getting older, Mr. Marlowe. And yeah.
So was this what we'd call a swan song?
I should think. But you know something? I really wish that Chandler had not written it, because
Really?
I could live with The Long Goodbye having been the final goodbye.
There you go.
It's not my favorite novel, but it's still got enough of that Chandler flair and magic that, okay, I could end gladly on that note. And
Okay.
I think this sort of disrupts that afterglow you got from The Long Goodbye. It's a great ending in The Long Goodbye, and I wish he'd just he'd let this one go. But
now, can you tell me where we get the title Playback from?
I think it maybe has to do with the fact that this woman's history is haunting her. It keeps replaying itself.
Oh,
because there's one character here who's really kind of vicious. He's this Henry Cumberland, who's the father of Betty Mayfield's husband, who had suffered this war injury, had a neck brace, and this had led to his death somehow. And we talked about this, how the jury convicted her, but then the North Carolina judge then reversed the decision. And this Henry Cumberland, father of the dead husband of Betty Mayfield, he was a real big shot in his small town. And he swore to, I think this phrase is even used, like, follow her to the ends of the earth, something along those lines. So he was like Ahab in The White Whale. He's gonna harpoon her, come what may. And he doesn't. The story ends finally when Marlowe and this Captain Alessandro that we mentioned earlier, they have a little tete-a-tete with this Henry Cumberland who has come into town, who actually seems to have been the original employer of Marlowe. That is to say, Henry Cumberland then went through this Clyde Umney lawyer in Los Angeles to then engage Marlowe. And Marlowe and Alessandro basically say, hey, get lost, pal, and be quick about it. How the mystery is that apparently, okay, so we have solved the mystery of Betty Mayfield. She was on the run from this fellow, this Henry Cumberland. She wanted to get away from him because he had sworn vengeance. And she also didn't want to be known as a possible murderess, even though she was then, the conviction was overturned by the judge. So she was trying to leave behind her past. So that prong of the three-pronged mystery is solved. The other two prongs are then solved in the last pages. It seems that the night on which Larry Mitchell and Betty Mayfield had this argument in this restaurant, this glass room, where this other fellow, this Clark Brandon, intervened on Betty's behalf and got rid of this Mitchell fellow. It seems they all met up in this Clark Brandon's hotel room at some point. This is how Marlowe dopes it out in front of Brandon, whom he confronts, and Brandon sort of assents, silent, gives his silent assent to Marlowe's version of what happened that night. And apparently he was like standing at the with his back to the balcony rail, which was very low, and then he had incited Betty at some point, and she gave him a push, and he went over and fell onto her balcony, because apparently these balconies were stepped, right? One balcony beneath is a little bit further out than the one above. So he fell onto her balcony, and yes, he died. Broken neck, whatever. And when then Betty went to wake up Marlowe and say, hey, I got this guy, this dead man on my balcony. In the meantime, this Clark Brandon had gone to work, and he was a big, powerful guy. So he was able to like tie a rope around this Larry Mitchell's body and then lower him down into the bushes at the base of the hotel. And then he put him in the car, drove around with his car, Larry Mitchell's car, because he'd gotten the car key out of his pocket before he'd lowered him into the bushes. Got his car, loaded Larry up there, put all his, packed all his suitcases, and he had access to his room, I guess. Packed all his suitcases, 9 of them, and put them in the car. Then he drove out to some remote inland canyon. And then, being the rich guy he was, he had a helicopter fly out, and then he loaded the suitcases and the body onto the helicopter, leaving the car, because the car was later discovered, his Larry Mitchell's car, but no Larry Mitchell. And they flew out over the Pacific, and they dumped it all in the Pacific. And somehow Marlowe figures this out, and it's somewhat unsatisfying. It's like it's sprung on us, because in the other novels, even though there are surprises, like, the classic one, Fair My Lovely, Velma is Mrs. Grail, right? You can kind of see how Marlowe was figuring it out as he went along. In retrospect, you can kind of follow the footprints of his solution of the mystery. But here you really can't. How did he figure that out with a helicopter? Because Marlowe is presenting this to this Larry Mitchell. And Mitchell sort of, as I say, gives silent assent to Marlowe's version of the tale. So the other 2 prongs of the mystery are solved. Apparently, this Betty Mayfield pushed this Larry Mitchell over the balcony, and he died. Whether she meant to kill him or not, it's unclear, but he did die. And then the person who disposed of the body was this Clark Brandon. So, case closed. And Marlowe doesn't report them to the authorities. He figures a bad egg got his just desserts, this Larry Mitchell. Again, this is his client, because a little money has passed hands from Betty Mayfield to Marlowe, so she's now his client. So he's not going to turn her in. And then this Clark Brandon, okay, he covered up a murder, but again, he was trying to protect this Betty Mayfield, as Marlowe had been trying to do at a certain point, and was still trying to do. And that's where it ends. And Marlowe goes back to LA, and I'm always glad when he goes back to LA. I feel right at home again. And this is a very Marlowe-esque passage. I didn't do more than 90 back to Los Angeles. Well, perhaps I hit 100 for a few seconds now and then. Back on Yucca Avenue, I stuck the olds in the garage and poked at the mailbox. Nothing, as usual. I climbed a long flight of redwood steps and unlocked my door. Everything was the same. The room was stuffy and dull and impersonal, as it always was. I opened a couple of windows and mixed a drink in the kitchen. I sat down on the couch and stared at the wall. Wherever I went, whatever I did, this was what I would come back to. A blank wall in a meaningless room in a meaningless house. That's the old Marlowe voice. That's Big Sleep Marlowe voice. That's Farewell My Lovely Marlowe voice.
Was that the last paragraph?
No, you know what the last paragraph is.
Remind me.
He gets a phone call, and it's from Linda Loring. And Linda Loring is the woman with whom he had a little one-night affair at the end of The Long Goodbye. You and I talked about this, how she had proposed marriage. Hey, let's get married. Or what if it doesn't work? What if it only works out 6 months? We have 6 months together then. And Marlowe goes, that'll never work, you crazy. You don't even love me. You just think you do. Well, now this is 18 months later, apparently. And she's calling from Paris. She's rich. She's calling from Paris, says, Phil, I just can't stop thinking about you. And he said, well, I've been thinking about you too. And she says, well, look, I'll send you a ticket. You can fly out to Paris. He said, you're not going to pay for my ticket. I'll pay for your ticket. You can come out here. And so apparently they're going to pick up where they left off. So like in The Long Goodbye, where Marlowe gets a friend, however temporarily, he now gets a girlfriend. However temporarily, we don't know. But the book ends with she says, he says, I'll be here. I always am, in his house, waiting for her to fly in from Paris. Hold me in your arms, says Linda. The phone clicked. There was a buzzing sound, and then the line went dead. Well, then again, like in almost every Chandler novel, this is my standard phrase, but it's a good one. There's a sort of a comic or or something that's not as sentimental to take the sting off the sentiment. And he gets a phone call then from this Clyde Umney, the lawyer, who wants like a complete and unexpurgated report of all the events of the past 48 hours. And Marlowe's in no mood at this point, and he's already been paid. And he says, I have a suggestion for you, Mr. Umney. Why don't you go kiss a duck? There were sounds of strangled fury as I hung up on him. Almost immediately, the telephone started to ring again. I hardly heard it. The air was full of music. That's the last line we ever have in a Chandler Marlowe novel. The air was full of music. Because of Linda Loring, who's going to be coming out to see him.
Now, I think before you said that in one of your criticisms of this a week or two ago, you said, I don't like it because in that novel, Philip Marlowe gets married. I thought you had said that, or was I incorrect in my hearing that?
Maybe I said that. If so, then it was wrong. He doesn't get married. But what I think happens is that in a novel that Chandler started called Poodle Springs, he only got 4 chapters written. I think they do get married and they move to Palm Springs. Chandler's name for Poodle.
That's the one where he may get married then, yeah.
I think he gets married there. Anyway, you mentioned Robert Parker many podcasts back, and he finished the Poodle Springs. And I've never read it because I just don't like the idea of someone else finishing another guy's novel. I wouldn't want someone doing that to me. So I have never read it. Maybe it's very good. Mr. Parker seems to have been a competent writer, but I have no desire to read it. So this is his last novel.
Okay,
Playback.
and we've got about 5 minutes left. So the good question here is, now that we've covered all 7 of Chandler's novels, where do we go from here? Do we want to do the screenplay of Double Indemnity next week? Do you have a copy of it?
Can I get a copy on the internet?
I don't know if you can. I have it in here.
Oh yeah.
The Chandler compilation on the bottom there, Double Indemnity, and then
Nice.
selected essays and letters. So I was able to read it, but if you don't have an easy access to it within this week, then maybe not.
Well, maybe I can watch the movie, and that should suffice. So you'll have read the screenplay. I'll have watched the movie if I can find it. I don't know if I can find it in a week.
You know what? I think it's better if you read the screenplay, because there's such in-depth description of every little gesture or movement or the way it's like you can tell where Chandler is influencing this script. And I think it's better to have the script than just watch the movie.
No doubt. But in lieu of that, I might just have to fall back on the movie. We don't want to bore our listeners right now with me Googling to see if I can get the Chandler Wilder script of Double Indemnity, but we'll see about that.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. But I think we can end on this note. And it's a note that Chandler himself ends on. That is to say, I have his collected letters. They were collected by Frank McShane, who was his first biographer. I think I have the biography. It came out in 1976 or something. Excellent biography. And he also then compiled his letters, edited his letters. And the last letter that Chandler maybe didn't write, but that we have of his in this compilation, and maybe McShane did this on purpose because it's just a beautiful way to end the Chandler's correspondence. He's talking to a correspondent about Marlowe. And it's interesting because here in this final letter, he's arguing against Marlowe having a love interest. He's arguing against Marlowe getting married. So maybe Chandler's final wishes were not, although he'd written these 4 chapters of Poodle Springs. I mean, the whole idea is that it's a conflicted marriage. Marlowe's not going to be some pampered little lapdog to some rich woman. He opens his own little detective agency in Poodle Springs, and he doesn't like all her shishi friends, right? So the marriage is doomed to failure. And in this final letter, Chandler basically says that, okay? And the final line that I love, and I've taken it down from my wall, because I have it here written on a little Post-it. After this description of Marlowe and everything else, and how he should not get together with a woman as a life partner, Chandler writes, final line of this thick compilation of his letters, talking about Marlowe. I see him always in a lonely street, in lonely rooms, puzzled, but never quite defeated. Period. Close the book. That's a beautiful line to end on, because that's how I see Marlowe too. That's the Marlowe I love. The lone wolf going down these mean streets.
Kev, one more option for next week.
Yeah.
Is the short story collection called Trouble Is My Business. It's got 4 short stories. Do you want to do that one?
No, I'm going to beg off on that one, Tim, because it's not full-blown Chandler. As you in our first podcast were right to say, when I was asserting how you and I both think Chandler's great. You said, well, I don't know if he's great because I've been reading these short stories and I can't assert that. Well, you're right. You don't get his greatness in those short stories. And
Okay.
again, he cannibalized many of them for his longer works. And I just don't want to go through them. It'd be a real anticlimax, more of an anticlimax than Playback, in fact.
Okay.
So,
Well then you've given us the final word on the Philip Marlowe character, and we've completed the 7 novels. So this is a good place to end our chat today. And as for what we'll do in the weeks ahead, we'll discuss that offline here.
right. Very good.
All right, Kev, thanks again for the survey.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, folks. And I hope you go and read Raymond Chandler.
All right.
Then I will have fulfilled my purpose in life.
You have more of a purpose in that, but
Well,
it's a nice sentiment anyway. Kev, so we'll be signing off. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
see you around.